Welcome back to the Agentic Insider. I'm your host, Philip Swan. In this show, we explore cutting-edge ideas and trends in AI and data, as well as hear from other industry thought leaders in the AI space. This podcast is brought to you by Iridius AI, committed to safe and responsible AI innovation. Let's dig in. Welcome to this week's edition of the Agentic Insider. With my co-host and I, we have an amazing human being, not an AI agent. He brings years of experience working in the data field. He previously worked as the Chief Data Officer of the US Space Force. He's been published in 5 journals, and he is the author of Next Generation Data Management, a book that guides organizations on how to leverage their data assets, I should say. And he is currently the Chief Data Officer for TRMC at KBR. Dr. Mark Brady, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Deputy CDO, actually, in that particular one. CDO of the Space Force previously.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that correction. Mark, it's an honor to have you on board. On this episode, you're doing so much to help the country and our national assets. So thank you for everything that you do. I would like to ask you the same question that we ask everybody who joins our podcast. What future are you solving for?
Solving for a future in which we may be able to deal with a couple of singularities, and we may not, depending on what we do.
Okay, so let's drill into that a little. I think it was almost a year ago you wrote this article for Chief Data Officer magazine, called The 6 Laws of Safe AI and How to Apply Them. And in that you were talking about 2 different singularities. So let's start there. So can you explain what you mean by the 2 singularities and what the first one of these is?
Yeah, so originally the idea of singularities comes from John von Neumann and Stanislaw Ulam, who worked on the Manhattan Project together. And it was von Neumann in that conversation who came up with the idea that at some point we might lose control of our technology based on the way that it advanced. And, it was interesting that they were able to foresee that back when they were just starting to develop a programmable computer. Anyway, since then we've thought of it in the context of artificial intelligence, that artificial intelligence is going to usher this in, and it will. But what was overlooked is that there's another singularity occurring before that. In fact, it's happening right now, and that's the first singularity. It's not really caused by artificial intelligence, although artificial intelligence could be part of the solution.
Okay. And so you think it's already happened?
Yeah, we're in the middle of it right now. And so there's various symptoms that we're seeing that support that. So think about something like CrowdStrike, which happened last year, as an example of the severity of the situation. That's one thing. Another thing is if you think about what happens when something's not working with your IT, you call up tech support. And what do? Do they say, oh yeah, we understand what's happening there. We see that such and such is broken, we have a bug, we're going to fix it. No, they say, turn off your computer and turn it back on, or restart the app. What that tells you is that you've got all these different states that a system or even a piece of software can be in, millions of them, even something like a word processor. And we don't really understand what it is that we've created. So we just go back up to the top and we hope that we don't fall into one of those fail states again. We also see it like in the case of CrowdStrike, it was an update. So our systems are so complicated that when we change something, we don't know what's downstream. So we don't know what's going to break. So somebody calls us up and tells us, hey, you broke my thing. And then we know that there's a problem and we fix it. So it's pretty much out of control. And then there's reasons why this has happened, as well as those symptoms.
Are you saying that it's really hard to be able to track data lineage?
Yeah. So a data system, what it is, it's a collection of nodes. Some of those nodes are processing data, some of those nodes are storing data, and then data is flowing from one node to another. And for various reasons, those nodes and the systems in their entirety have become black boxes. We don't know what's in them. So we study them as if they're some kind of new organism, and we're biologists. And it's very ironic because we created these things.
Okay, so let's move on to the second singularity. So help us understand, what's the second singularity? How do you define that?
So the second singularity is the one that most people think of when they think of the singularity, and that is where artificial intelligence becomes more intelligent than humans, and we lose control of it, and it presents an existential threat to humanity.
Would I be wrong in thinking that some of these thoughts on the singularity is an evolution on Asimov's three laws of robotics? Would I be wrong in thinking that way?
Well, the laws of robotics come from Isaac Asimov back around 1942. He wrote a novel called I, Robot, but really it came out first in a short story called Runaround. And he was seeing into the future. Again, it was before we had programmable computers, but we were on the cusp of all that. And Asimov foresaw a day when robots could be dangerous to human beings. So they didn't have a term AI. So it was robots. And it's appropriate to be robots also in the sense that they have physical embodiment, whereas a lot of AI today is sitting in a box. So it can be less dangerous in the sense that it's sitting in a box, even if it's very smart. And so he came up with this three laws of robotics. And it wasn't necessarily that he had an objective of telling us how to be safe. This was science fiction, and he was just philosophizing in a way. So the three laws, basically, they specify that a robot will not do harm to a human being, and it will, not do harm to itself or another robot. And, there's certain ordering in those three as well. And what these laws really are, is these are objective functions. So any AI is trying to do something. It has an objective, and that's very important. And it's related to human emotion, which we stereotypically don't think of artificial intelligence or robots as having emotions. But one thing that emotions do is they motivate us to do things. They provide us with an objective. And this is really one of the main keys to AI dangers and AI safety.
It's really quite fascinating how, I've always said that science fiction becomes science fact. And, we've seen it, with Star Trek, we've seen it with Asimov. I'm a huge Asimov fan, have been since a young child, right? Foundation is just mind-blowing to me, as an example. But as you start getting into it, having AI having objective functions that maximize replication or resource acquisition, why is something like this critical from preventing AI competing with humans, do you think?
Yeah, and that's something that actually you don't want to have happen. So the Asimov laws of robotics, those are not just objective functions, those are a special kind of objective functions. They're safety objective functions, right? Which is what we want to focus on. But a human or a machine that's intelligent is going to have a number of objective functions, a number of things that it's trying to do, and they're going to be ordered and so forth. So the objective functions that are not safety functions, those need to be subordinate. The safety functions have to override all those things. So that's the first part of AI safety, is establishing that you have these safety objective functions. However, there's also another area which is related, and that is AI evolution. So that sounds very science fiction-y also. But the thing is, right now, we already have software, which is writing other software in the form of AI writing software. So it's a short step then to have AI creating other AI. And therefore, it's essential that whenever an AI creates another AI, that new AI could be slightly different. And if you do them repeatedly, then what you end up with is AI evolution. So you need to make sure that those safety objective functions are passed down from one generation of AI to the next. There's a second part to that. Now, if you think about conflict and competition among organisms, which is very common, there's also, as you know, there's also cooperation, symbiotic relationships, but competition is very prevalent between plants as well as animals. And why is that? Well, it's because they have a overriding objective function. It's not a safety objective function. There's really not such a thing in biology. But what every organism attempts to do is maximize the number of copies of its genome, which in turn maximizes the number of copies of the thing itself. And this is one thing that can't be allowed in AI evolution. And you cannot have an objective function which maximizes the number of copies, because that's extremely dangerous. What it does is it instills competition. It gives a reason for competing. And then a corollary of that, which is another one of the 6 laws, is that an AI cannot attempt to maximize the resources that are available to it.
This is really important stuff. So as you consider this, how would you recommend organizations implement this, tackle the implementation of this?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of confusion around the 6 laws. When people hear 6 laws, they think, oh, this is going to be 6 laws on the books, like a statute, right? But it's not meant to be that. It's meant to be more like laws of physics. These are just things that make AI safe, and they also recognize the particular categories of the danger. So, back when people were first identifying this as a danger, and most recently, we have various luminaries talking about it, we were left with just a situation where we're told, hey, this is an existential threat and we're just waiting for AI to come kill us all. So wasn't really a very satisfactory position to be in. So these are a set of rules. Now, we're not really at a point of AGI where we really have these dangers materializing, but they could be coming at any point soon. So we should prepare. And so what I would encourage organizations to do is not focus on things like AI bias and things like that as real dangers. These are not significant dangers, really. They might be things that you might be concerned with, but they're nothing like what we're talking about here. So I would be prepared for the future. Make sure you have these safety objective functions embedded in your systems.
Yeah, so could you maybe explain for the audience the difference between a safety objective function and a regular objective function in AI systems? What the difference might be?
Yeah, well, the reason they're called functions to begin with is that imagine a graph, right? And it has of X versus Y. And there could be some maximum in there, some maximum value or some minimum value. And so what these algorithms do, and this has been the case from the beginning of AI, is they try to achieve that maximum Y based on some behavior X. So that's how the whole issue of objective functions come about. And so an objective function could be to produce better responses. If it's a robot, to not fall down. To move faster, to be able to have a higher accuracy in recognizing objects and computer vision. Basically, it's performance, which is being maximized, or an error function. If the function's an error function, you're trying to minimize it.
And so, I want to come back to the laws because I think this is really relevant. Obviously, this is the Agentic Insider podcast, and we want this is about embedding. If you're talking about building agents which will proliferate, well, this sorts of things are going to be fundamental in terms of the way that you train them and in terms of giving them a credo and constitution with which they have to sort of live by. And so, if I just quote here, I mean, your first law of safe AI is every AI shall have a safety objective function, which is what we've been talking about. And an AI shall never modify any of its own safety objective functions. So I want to touch on that last part a little bit. So why add in an AI shall never modify any of its own safety objective functions? So this is an agent, okay? Why can't the agent self-modify these safety objective functions?
Well, think about the way that traditional computing systems, machines differ from human intelligence. Humans are extremely autonomous. We not only have objective functions, but we can change those. We can decide to take up a new hobby, to play golf, to better our minds by reading. We're unpredictable in a way because if you observe a human and you see what it's doing, and then you come back 5 years later, that human can be doing something completely different. So it's a kind of meta intelligence to not only try to maximize or minimize the values within your objective functions, but to create entirely new objectives.
Okay, and for the second one, you've got the second law of safe AI is that safety objective functions shall always overrule, I should say, other objective functions. So why make these the primary ethos for what they're trying to do?
Well, if an AI is creating its own objective functions or adding to them, and one of those becomes superior or overrides the safety objective functions. Say it's something which maximizes resources or something like that, or in any way sees human activity or what's beneficial to humans as being in conflict with what it's trying to do, then you have AI danger and you have competition between humans and AI.
Okay, all right, that makes a lot of sense. And you touched earlier as well on machine evolution. And so we had a podcast guest, Dr. Vinesh Sukumar, on just recently, and he was talking about maybe in their bank they have 15 million accounts. If each of those could be an agent monitoring the accounts, then probably you'll have multiple agents monitoring it for different reasons. So now you're in maybe 4 or 5 times that amount. So suddenly you're into 60 million agents and those sorts of things. It isn't like, oh, we might have 2 or 3 agents running around. They're going to be into the millions across organizations, if not the tens and hundreds of millions over time. And so, as these machines are starting to say, oh, what's missing in my life is another agent that would help me out, and then I'm going to build another agent to be able to do that. And ultimately, there's no reason why they can't build more agents, because ultimately they see the role that they're performing and they can decompose it. So then why wouldn't they have a swarm of agents that could then come together to do that? So the idea of machines creating other machines that differ from themselves is obviously there. And so I know that you were moving then into the machine evolution side of things. So your third law was any safe AI building other AIs has to include its own safety objective functions. So why does it have to cascade those set of safety objective functions down to everything that it creates?
Because otherwise it could create an AI that doesn't have any safety objective functions at all.
But what if it needs to have safety objective functions that go beyond its own ones? Can it add others to it? So I have agent A and agent B, and we are both parents. Can we create something that is a combination? I obviously can't take anything from A and I can't take anything from B. And the new A agent that's the AB agent isn't allowed to change itself. So it now has everything from A, everything from B. How does this work?
Good point. So the safety objective functions in the descendants of any AI creating other AIs has to be at least as good. But who's going to judge that? So one reason for stating it the way that he did was a lot of this is going to be going on and not readily obvious to human beings, right? So
Sure.
an AI may go off and create some number of generations of itself. And so we want to make sure that it at least has those original safety objective functions, because those are the ones that we know about. So otherwise, what we have to do is we have to have a committee or something get in there and take a look at it and say, okay, is this one okay? And that's a possibility. You could build your AIs such that they don't pull the trigger on creating the next generation until these safety objective functions are cleared by human authorities.
Sure. Or human authorities that have delegated it to agentic authorities that then are able to take that empowerment and then adjust the relevant safety functions of other agents within their empowerment sphere.
Right.
So we talked about evolution, and as part of this conversation so far, right? You've predicted, we're going to have 4 different intelligences, in the far future. Biological machine, machine augmented biological, and biological augmented machine. How do you see all of these coexisting, Mark?
Well, what we're anticipating is that machine intelligence is going to overwhelm human intelligence in the sense that eventually it'll be able to do everything that humans can do and more. And already it can do things that humans can't do. And that's been the case right from the very beginning. So, and that's what I call extra intelligence. Nobody really talks about it, but it's already always been there since the 40s. And in the classic Venn diagram, so human intelligence is static, but it's really not necessarily static. There's a number of things that could happen. So what's probably happening right now with human intelligence is probably decreasing. And the reason it's probably decreasing, that it has to be decreasing really, is that the genome's always drifting. It's always changing. And that's why no species goes on forever. People are really panicking over the idea that, well, at some point we might not exist. Well, I guarantee you at some point we're not going to exist. What usually happens with a species, though, is there's some kind of selective pressure on that genome, which pushes it into a direction. And that's why animals just don't evolve into a quivering blob of random nothingness. And in the case of humans, do we have selective pressure? No, we don't really have selective pressure. Like if your heart's beating, you can pretty much reproduce. So we suffer from that situation. Now, what about the other direction? Could humans become more intelligent? Well, they could. And the way that they could do that is through genetically modifying humans, which of course is very controversial. A lot of people don't even like GMO food. But I guarantee you that in the future, there will be genetically modified humans. And so they could be made healthier, they could be made more athletic, they could be made more congenial, and they will be made more intelligent also. Sounds very far-flung, but it's actually already been done. Not all those things, but there are 2 genetically modified people at least alive today.
Right. Yeah, and there's been a lot of discussion around that. So why do you believe that the common assumption that superior intelligence will always seek to eliminate lesser intelligence is incorrect? Why do you think it's incorrect?
Well, I don't think it's incorrect. I think it's an invalid assumption. So there's a subtle difference between the two, right? So if something is a bad assumption, that means it's not absolutely true, that different things could happen. So there's 3 assumptions that are important about AI, which are incorrect, which we need to recognize. One is that, as you say, a superior intelligence will attempt to eliminate a lesser intelligence. We don't have to look very far to see a counterexample. If you look at humans, there are cases where we have eliminated other species and driven them to extinction, but it generally isn't done by intent. there's only one case that I know of where it was done by intent. Usually it's done through negligence or by accidentally eliminating habitat, something like that. Another assumption is that a superior intelligence can eliminate a lesser intelligence. And if you look at various parasites and invasive species and things like that, most often we're not able to eliminate them. So that's not a valid assumption either. In both cases, like I said, it doesn't mean that these things aren't going to happen, but we can't just assume that they will. And then the third one is that there's just one AI out there, kind of like Skynet and the Terminator. People talk about AI like it's one thing, but there will be lots of different AIs. There are already lots of different AIs. And so already we've talked about two of them. One is safe AI, and there can be multiples in that category. And the other category is dangerous AI. And there's also a third category. The third category is a defensive AI, which is a subcategory of a safe AI. It's a safe AI which counters dangerous AIs. So if AI is smarter than we are, how are we going to be able to compete with it? How are we going to be able to make sure something's not going awry? We need AI to help us, so we'll have an AI helper, and that'll be the defensive AI.
So is this? So in your mind, is this an automated AI watchdog that's controlled by somebody? I mean, what risks could arise from sort of having a defensive AI become an arms race participant in that respect?
Well, there will be. So if you think about cybersecurity, for instance, it isn't like we come up with some cybersecurity rules, which, by the way, we're not doing a very good job in that area. It's more like putting Band-Aids on things than actually coming up with a set of rules like we're talking about here. But it's ongoing. And in the case of AI, even if you have the 6 laws, and even if they're recognized and everyone knows, or most people know that this is what you're supposed to do, there'll be cases where it isn't done. It's not going to be done for malicious reasons in some cases, negligence in other cases, ignorance. There's a number of reasons. And then if you think about AI evolution, then there's a lot of stuff that's going to be going on which is not visible, right? So it will be a kind of an arms race. We will have to constantly be striving to make AI safe and to counter dangerous AI. So but so some people might say, well, let's just forget about it then. Well, no, you don't just forget about it. If you forget about it, then you're forfeiting the game. You're going to lose for sure.
Yeah, I want to try one more thing. I want to just test around the edges here. So I mean, there's no in the 6 laws and the way that you've taught them through and so on. There's no explicit mention of AI explainability or auditability, which tends to be a key pillar as we talk about a trustworthy AI. So why wouldn't we have I don't know, like something like a 7th law that says, and I'm going to brief here, AI decisions and behaviors must be transparent and explainable to, I don't know, authorized human overseers or something like that. Why wouldn't there be something around that side of things from a safety perspective? Because I guess what I'm asking is, without explainability, it feels like safety functions can't be validated or trusted. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It in one sense, it's hard to achieve. So if you think about, going back to the first singularity and all the billions of lines of code that are out there, it's hard to keep a handle on it. And in the case of artificial intelligence, it's even harder because not only do you have code, but you have synaptic connections. And we don't really have an explanation as to what these different synaptic connections mean. Just think about the work that neuroscientists do trying to understand the human brain and how challenging that is. However, there there is the ability now in AI for the AI to explain its reasoning, and it's quite impressive. And I think in that regard, as long as AI is not lying to us, that we can track what it's thinking. So it's very, there are ways that we can track it that aren't absolutely foolproof. And there are other things that are extremely difficult. But I agree with you that explainability is very valuable if you can get it, which mostly you can't.
Very true. Very true. Something we struggle with every day. Absolutely.
So direction I'd like to take the conversation is, we've been talking, some theoretical, some practical and realistic, but I want to get to where we are today and where the ball's going to be in the, in the short future. So personally, how do you define agentic AI, and how does it differ from the current generation of AI systems or solutions that we're seeing today, in your opinion?
It's a level of autonomy, right? So right now, I'd say where we are, well, backing up a second, in order to talk about autonomy, we have to talk about the ingredients that go into it. Right? Well, what are the things that humans traditionally have that machines don't? And so that'll tell us what the path is. So one of those things is analogical reasoning. This is what makes humans so autonomous, so unpredictable, so able to take what they know in one field and apply it to another. And the reason that we have that is because our memories are associative. In other words, when we learn something new, we don't just take random information and record it in a concrete way, the way traditional computers do. We take it and we hang it on a framework of something that we already know. And so in that sense, what's new is old, but also what's new and old can be a springboard to new things that we can do. Think of examples like the heliocentric model of the solar system, right? So in this coming out of Copernicus and Newton and so forth. Well, based on that, when they were trying to understand the atom, which is an entirely different thing, obviously, you're going from something gigantic to something very small. Scientists had this in the back of their mind, and they were able to make this leap. Oh, maybe we have a mass in the middle, and then we have things in a force field revolving around it, namely electrons. So we're able to do these sorts of things. A person who's really educated, they go to university, they get a degree, and if they are truly one of the educated and don't just have a piece of paper at the end of that, what they're able to do is major in psychology, say, and then go become a banker and somehow take the principles they learned in a course of statistics and apply them in a completely different area, not as psychology and not as statistics. So that's analogical thinking. And large language models right now are able to do analogical thinking. I've been doing some experiments on them, and then just for fun, ask them straight out, can you do analogical reasoning? They say, yeah. Another one is intuition. And we think of that as being sort of supernatural. Is it even really a thing, right? And it is. And the way that we know it is because we have theoretical mathematicians, and their job is to prove theorems all day. Sometimes takes a very long time. But anyway, so Gödel, back I think it was 1931, proved that there's no significant mathematical system wherein everything is proven. We think of mathematicians as being very logical, that they deduce everything. But in fact, they have to start with some axioms. How do they know that those axioms are true? The only way that they know is from experience in the physical world. So that's where we get that. So there you have robotics. Robots are out in the physical world, and they're gaining that experience. And so robotics will drive AI, whereas normally we think of as AI is driving robotics. So they'll both drive one another. And then there's emotion is another one. So we talked a little bit about objective functions, which are related to emotion, and you will see in the future robots that not only express emotion, there already are some that express emotion, but there will be some that experience emotion as well.
So where do you see some of the biggest, you come out of the defense arena, the government arena. Where do you see some of the biggest opportunities for agentic AI in defense and government applications? Is that something you can share?
And I can speak generally about it. So, we talked a lot about safety, and the military example is very interesting because it doesn't really follow that set of rules. If you think about Asimov's laws, obviously they're all violated in the military examples, right?
Hmm.
So safety, then refining our concept of it, it's subjective in terms of like who's safe and who isn't, right? And there's meta levels of safety. So Americans may be more safe by making Iranians less safe. All right. You have those kinds of relationships. Now, I think as a laboratory, the the military applications in places like Ukraine are essential. We can test things all we want in the laboratory, but until we have a real adversary, then you're not really taking things to the max in terms of testing it. And so you're seeing massive progress going on. One reason autonomy is so important in military applications is because of electronic warfare. So the electronic, a big thing prior to this, and people would call it robotics and so forth, although really it wasn't. It was more remote control. Remote control weapons were a major advance. But if you can't communicate with your weapon, then it just falls out of the sky or it sits on the ground, doesn't do anything, right? Or it could even be turned against you or go someplace it's not supposed to go. So what we're starting to see now is drones that can be told to go to a general area. Once they're in that area, they can seek out targets and engage them. And it doesn't require any communication to the home base, although communication will still be important for other purposes.
Right, because otherwise safety goes out the window, and then you know so what is your current assessment, you think, or current capabilities and limitations of autonomous AI agents in general, just in general in the world out there?
I think large language models are very impressive. I converse with them every day and continue to be surprised at what they can do, but they live in a box. So you've got the world out there, and then you've got humans, which are living in the world, and then they convey information to these large language models using a keyboard. I mean, you can't have a worse bottleneck than that. I mean, the only reason we have this great wealth of information that's been entered by keyboard is we have a backlog of it that's been collected for many years. But to really accelerate, to get to the next level, you have to let the AI out of the box. So humans are the bottleneck on the way in, and we're the bottleneck on the way out. We're the acting as the physical embodiment. So I think once you have AIs which have a physical body, they're able to go out there, they're able to generate some objective functions to become even more flexible, even though that's a risky proposition. They may need to do that in order to, say, go out and collect some of their own information that we hadn't even thought about, or which isn't readily available on the internet or in books and other recorded information like that.
So this has been a fascinating conversation, Mark. We like to finish off by helping our listeners know a little bit more about the person on the episode. Can you share with us anything that you like to do for fun, Mark?
I like an AI that's gotten out of the box. I like to get away from the keyboards and the monitors, and I like to grow things and I like to do mountaineering and big game hunting and things like that where I interact with the real world.
Awesome. Awesome. Then you and I will share a passion around mountaineering for sure. I didn't realize that. So if you're ever out on the West Coast, let's go, man. I'm happy to rope
Yeah.
up with you or go hiking with you. So that would be great. And and if people are aspiring to, in their careers, what career advice would you give to somebody?
Well, if you want to be a data scientist or work your way up to be a chief data officer, I would recommend first working as an analyst. As an analyst, you're going to be able to see all the issues that your customers have, what kind of information they request, and you'll also be able to see those data systems that are feeding you the data and how well they work or how well they don't work.
That's great. Mark Brady, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really enthralling. I've learned a lot personally, so thank you so much. That's a wrap on this week's episode of the Agentic Insider. Thank you for listening. For show notes and more, please visit agenticinsider.show. To learn more about Iridius, visit iridius.ai. We'll see you next time.